Amara Williams had always been aware of the world's complexities, the unspoken divisions, the societal rules that drew lines between people based on the color of their skin. She had grown up in a close-knit community in the heart of the city, surrounded by people who shared her experiences and struggles. Her family, proud of their heritage, had raised her with a sense of resilience and pride, but also with caution, especially when it came to the world outside their circles. She worked as a marketing manager at a prestigious firm, a place where she often felt like an outsider. Despite her professional achievements, she couldn't help but notice how her colleagues treated her differently. The subtle glances, the microaggressions, everything served as a constant reminder that, in certain spaces, she was never truly welcome. But there was one person at work who treated her differently: Nate Summers, a young white man with messy brown hair and piercing blue eyes. Nate was an enigma. Friendly and charismatic, he often spoke up for her in meetings, admired her ideas, and encouraged her when the room was hesitant. They started working on a project together, spending long hours in the office, exchanging stories, laughter, and subtle glances that turned into something more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, the office lights casting a soft glow, Nate leaned over the desk, his voice low. "I don't know what it is about you, Amara. You're different from everyone here. You make things feel real." Amara's heart fluttered, her thoughts a mix of excitement and hesitation. She had never allowed herself to consider a relationship outside the boundaries of her community, but something about Nate felt different. He was kind, not like the others. He seemed to see her, to understand her. And despite the pull of their connection, Amara couldn't ignore the voices in her head. What would her family think? What would her friends say? They had their first kiss on a warm Friday evening after a long work week, caught in a moment of pure emotion. Nate was gentle, tender, as though afraid to rush it. Amara felt her walls begin to crumble as he kissed her again, this time with more urgency, more hunger. The spark that ignited in her chest, however, was followed by a flash of doubt. "What are we doing, Nate?" she asked softly, pulling back just slightly. Nate looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "I don't know. But I want to figure it out with you." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind. They shared stolen moments during lunch breaks, long conversations in quiet corners of the office, and even took weekend trips out of the city. Yet, despite the magic of their connection, the tension between them was undeniable. Nate's friends began to notice, throwing pointed comments her way, ones that were veiled in casual jokes but laced with discomfort. Amara's family, protective and wary, started to raise questions, reminding her of the harsh realities of the world. The world they both lived in seemed determined to tear them apart, but neither of them was ready to walk away. Their love felt like a secret, a fragile thing that they clung to in the face of rising pressure. As their relationship deepened, the pressure surrounding them only grew. Amara found herself standing at the intersection of love and loyalty, torn between the man she had come to care for deeply and the expectations of her family and friends. Nate was well-meaning, but there was something he couldn't understand about the weight she carried. Her every step in this relationship felt like a tightrope walk. One misstep could bring down everything she had worked for, everything her family had struggled to protect. One evening, as they sat at a small cafe, Nate's hand gently brushing hers across the table, Amara felt the shift. She noticed the uncomfortable stares of the people around them, the whispers, the glances from across the room. In that moment, it became clear to her that her community would never accept her being with Nate, and that truth hit her like a cold wave. Even more than that, she was realizing that Nate, despite his best intentions, didn't fully comprehend the gravity of her internal struggle. "I need to go home tonight, Nate," she said softly, pulling her hand away from his. Nate looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "We're fine, Amara. You know I care about you." "It's not about us," she whispered, her voice shaky. "It's about everything else." Days turned into weeks, and the pressure only mounted. Nate had stopped coming to their usual hangouts after work, his friends casting judgment in hushed tones. Amara's family grew more and more concerned, speaking openly about their fears, warning her about the dangers of dating someone like Nate. Her mother, once so supportive, began to voice her disapproval, urging her to consider what was at stake. The tension reached its breaking point when Amara's younger brother, Malik, confronted Nate outside her apartment one evening. "You think you can just waltz in here and be part of this family? She doesn't need you, man. She's doing fine without you." The words were sharp, laced with anger. Nate, looking uncomfortable, attempted to explain, but Malik wouldn't listen. "You think we don't see through your game? You're just another white boy trying to prove something. You don't care about her, you don't get it." The confrontation left Amara reeling. The walls her family had built around her were being erected again, and Nate, despite all his love for her, seemed unable to truly break through. That night, she stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection, the weight of it all bearing down on her. Could she continue to fight this battle, or was it time to walk away? Amara had spent the days since her breakup with Nate immersed in silence, desperately trying to make sense of the chaos in her heart. Her family's rejection was painful, but she couldn't ignore the weight of Nate's absence. She had loved him, not just for the person he was in front of her, but for the possibility of a life they could have shared. But the truth, the one that had been hidden from her, had shattered that dream. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amara was sitting alone in her apartment, staring out of the window, her thoughts clouded. That was when the knock on the door came. It was a reporter. Her heart sank when she saw the serious expression on his face. "I need to talk to you about Nate Summers," he began, his voice low and urgent. "I've uncovered some things you might want to know." Amara, her pulse quickening, invited him in without hesitation. The reporter handed her a file filled with photographs, police reports, and court documents. It was all about Nate, the man she had fallen in love with, the man she had believed was the future of her life. The truth was darker than she could have imagined. The file revealed that years ago, Nate had been involved in a violent gang, a group known for committing brutal crimes. The records detailed assaults, thefts, and even a questionable death in a fight that Nate had been a part of. He had managed to clean up his life, burying the past in favor of a fresh start, but the damage was still there, lurking in the shadows. The reporter explained that Nate had been able to suppress the truth with the help of powerful connections, people who had protected him in exchange for his loyalty. Amara felt her stomach churn as she read the pages, each new detail confirming the worst of her fears. How could she not have seen it? She had been so blinded by her own feelings, so desperate to hold on to something good, that she hadn't questioned the man she thought she knew. But now, the truth was undeniable. The next few days were a blur. Amara couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Her heart, once full of love for Nate, now carried only betrayal and confusion. She could feel her family's disapproval growing stronger, and the pressure from her community to distance herself from him weighed heavily on her. Then, one morning, her phone rang. It was Nate. "Amara," he said, his voice hoarse, "I know you know. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I need to explain." Amara could hear the desperation in his voice, the anguish of someone who had never truly let go of their past. And in that moment, she knew that what had been building between them, this relationship that had started as something pure, could no longer continue. Nate had been hiding a part of himself that was too dark to ignore, and the consequences of his actions weren't something she could simply overlook. The weight of his past, his choices, his silence, it had all built up to this moment of reckoning. "Why didn't you tell me?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you trust me with the truth?" "I wanted to," Nate replied, his voice breaking. "But I couldn't risk losing you. I thought I could start fresh, that I could be someone else. But I was wrong." Amara closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. She loved him, she always would. But there was something more powerful than love in this moment, truth. The truth of who Nate had been, and the truth of who he had tried to become. "I can't be with you, Nate," she whispered. "Not after this." The line went quiet, and she could almost hear the heavy sigh on the other end. But she didn't wait for him to speak again. She had made her decision. Amara spent the next few weeks finding solace in her family and her friends. She didn't regret the love she had shared with Nate, but she realized that some relationships, no matter how much we wish otherwise, weren't meant to last. She couldn't turn a blind eye to the truth, even if it meant facing the pain of losing someone she thought she would spend her life with. The news about Nate's past leaked, and the public reaction was swift. Strickland Industries distanced themselves from him, and his friends, who had once praised him, began to turn their backs. But for Amara, the fallout wasn't about Nate's past, it was about her future. In the quiet moments, she reflected on how far she had come. She had learned to trust her instincts, to honor the strength of her own voice. And though the path had been difficult, it had brought her closer to understanding herself. Months later, she moved to a new city, far from the memories that had haunted her. She built a new life, a life of independence and peace. There were no more questions about who she was supposed to be. There was only the woman she had become, stronger and more resolute than she ever thought possible. And as she stood in the window of her new apartment, looking out over the city skyline, she knew that no matter how complicated the past had been, her future was entirely her own.